I still remember the exact moment my world shattered. It was my husband's funeral reception, and my sister-in-law stood up in front of 43 people and announced that Richard had left their family's $2.1 million lakehouse tour. Everyone applauded. I had managed that property for 18 years. I had nursed my husband through 3 years of cancer. He promised me that home would always be mine. That was in 2011. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Richard and I met in the summer of 1987 at a community theater production in Minneapolis. I was playing the lead in Our Town, and he was running the sound booth. He proposed to me 6 months later on the dock of his family's lakehouse in northern Minnesota. That property had been in the Henderson family for 4 generations. It sat on 12 acres of pristine shoreline on Lake Vermilion, with a main house, a guest cottage, and a boathouse that Richard's grandfather had built with his own hands in 1952. When Richard's parents passed away in 2003, he inherited the lakehouse. His younger sister Patricia got the family home in St. Paul, which was worth considerably less but came with no maintenance headaches. Patricia never complained about this arrangement, at least not to our faces. Richard and I didn't have children. We tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. Instead, we poured our love into that lakehouse. Every summer, we hosted the entire Henderson family there. Thanksgiving dinners, 4th of July celebrations. I learned to maintain the property myself because Richard traveled frequently for his engineering consulting work. I repainted the boathouse. I replaced the dock boards. I managed the rental income during the months we weren't there because Richard believed the house should pay for its own upkeep. In 2008, Richard was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 18 months. He fought for 3 years. During those 3 years, I became everything: nurse, chauffeur, advocate. I quit my job as a high school English teacher to care for him full-time. I learned to administer his medications, manage his feeding tube, change his wound dressings. Some nights I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed because I was afraid he would stop breathing if I closed my eyes. Through all of it, Richard kept telling me the same thing. "The lakehouse is yours, Eleanor. No matter what happens, you'll always have our home." He had a will drawn up in 2009, shortly after his diagnosis. His attorney, a man named Gerald Hoffman, came to our house in Minneapolis and spent 3 hours with us going over everything. I remember sitting at our kitchen table while Richard signed document after document. He was so weak by then that his signature was barely legible. The will was clear. The lakehouse and all its contents would pass to me upon Richard's death. Patricia would receive his investment portfolio, which at the time was worth approximately $400,000. Richard also left $50,000 to the local hospice organization that had helped us so much. I asked him that day if Patricia would be upset about the lakehouse. "She understands," Richard said. "We've talked about it. She knows how much you've sacrificed, and she knows how much that place means to both of us. Besides, she's never liked the maintenance. She told me years ago she'd rather have the investments." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Richard never lied to me in 32 years of marriage. He died on a Tuesday morning in March 2011. I was holding his hand. The hospice nurse was there, and she cried with me. Richard had touched so many lives in his 64 years, and losing him felt like losing a part of myself. The funeral was held at the Lutheran church where we had been married. Over 200 people attended. Patricia sat in the front row with her husband Donald and their 2 adult children, Michael and Jennifer. She wore a black dress and pearls that had belonged to her mother. She held my hand during the service and told me how grateful she was that I had taken such good care of her brother. The reception was held at the lakehouse. It seemed fitting. Richard would have wanted to be celebrated in the place he loved most. I spent the 3 days between his death and the funeral preparing the house. I cleaned every room. I arranged flowers from our garden. I cooked his favorite dishes and set them out on the long pine table in the dining room where we had shared so many meals. About an hour into the reception, Patricia stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon. "Everyone," she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room, "I have an announcement to make. As most of you know, this lakehouse has been in the Henderson family for 4 generations. My brother loved this place more than anywhere else on earth." People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. "That's why I'm so honored," Patricia continued, to announce that Richard made arrangements before his death to transfer this property to me. He wanted to ensure it would stay in the Henderson family bloodline. I felt the blood drain from my face. I've already begun working with a developer who's interested in subdividing the acreage, she said. We'll be preserving the main house, of course, but the guest cottage and boathouse will be demolished to make room for 3 luxury lakefront lots. The sale should bring in approximately $2.1 million. People started clapping. I sat there frozen, my hands gripping the arms of Richard's favorite chair. The room seemed to spin around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I watched Patricia accept congratulations from family friends, watched her husband Donald shake hands with people I had known for decades, and I felt like I was drowning. My friend Carol, who had been sitting beside me, leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Eleanor, what is she talking about? I thought Richard left you the house." I couldn't answer her. I just shook my head and stumbled out of the room. I made it to the upstairs bathroom before I started sobbing. I locked the door and sat on the cold tile floor and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. When I finally came back downstairs, most of the guests had left. Patricia was in the kitchen, directing the caterers as they cleaned up. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Can I speak to you in private?" I asked. She nodded and led me to the small study off the living room. Richard's study. His books were still on the shelves. His reading glasses were still sitting on the desk. "Patricia," I said, my voice shaking. "What are you talking about? Richard left me this house. I was there when he signed the will." She sighed and pulled a folder from her oversized purse. "I was hoping we could discuss this later," she said, "but since you're asking..." She handed me a document. It was a transfer deed, dated 6 weeks before Richard's death. According to this paper, Richard had signed over full ownership of the lakehouse property to Patricia Ann Henderson Morrison. The signature at the bottom looked like Richard's, shaky and barely legible, just like his signature had been in those final months. "I don't understand," I said. "This isn't possible. Richard never mentioned this. He would have told me." Patricia's face hardened. "My brother was a private man," she said. "He made his own decisions. Perhaps he didn't tell you everything, but his will." "Gerald Hoffman, we signed everything together." Patricia shrugged. "A transfer deed supersedes a will," she said. "This property was transferred to me while Richard was still alive. The will is irrelevant." I stared at her. This woman I had known for 32 years. This woman who had been my maid of honor. This woman whose children I had helped raise, whose birthdays I had celebrated, whose hand I had held at her own parents' funerals. "Richard would never do this," I said. "But he did," Patricia replied, "and I have the legal documentation to prove it. I think it's best if you start making arrangements to remove your personal belongings from the property. I'll give you 30 days. She walked out of the study and left me standing there alone, holding a piece of paper that was about to destroy my life. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls and legal consultations and sleepless nights. I contacted Gerald Hoffman, the attorney who had drafted Richard's will. He was shocked when I showed him the transfer deed. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Richard was adamant about leaving you the lake house. We discussed it at length. He never mentioned anything about transferring it to his sister." "Is the signature genuine?" I asked. He studied the document for a long time. "It could be," he said carefully. "Richard's signature deteriorated significantly in his final months. But Eleanor, I have to tell you something. This transfer deed is dated February 3rd, 2011. Richard was in the hospital that entire week. He had emergency surgery on February 1st for a bowel obstruction. He was heavily sedated for days afterward. I remember because I was supposed to meet with him to update his insurance beneficiaries, and we had to postpone. I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. "Are you saying he couldn't have signed this?" Gerald was cautious. "I'm saying it seems unlikely. But we would need to prove it. We would need hospital records, testimony from medical staff, possibly a handwriting expert. This won't be easy, Eleanor. And it won't be cheap." I didn't care about the cost. I had some savings, and I had Richard's life insurance. More importantly, I had the truth. My husband did not betray me in his final weeks. I knew it in my bones. I hired a lawyer named Sandra Chen. She specialized in estate disputes and came highly recommended by Gerald. Sandra was a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She listened to my story without interruption, reviewed all the documents, and then said something that changed everything. "We need to find out who witnessed this transfer deed," she said. I looked at the document again. There were 2 witness signatures at the bottom. The names were illegible, but there was a notary stamp from a woman named Linda Kowalski. Sandra tracked down Linda Kowalski within a week. She was a mobile notary who made house calls, primarily to elderly and homebound clients. When Sandra called her, Linda was cooperative at first. Yes, she remembered notarizing a document for a Richard Henderson. Yes, it was a property transfer. Yes, the man had seemed very ill. But then Sandra asked her where the notarization had taken place. "At his home," Linda said, "a nice house in Minneapolis. The sister was there, she set up the appointment." Sandra pressed further. "Can you describe the home? What room were you in?" Linda paused. "I don't remember exactly. It was a living room, I think. Beige carpet, floral couch." Sandra thanked her and hung up. "Our house doesn't have beige carpet," I said. "And we've never owned a floral couch." Sandra smiled. "I know. And more importantly, Richard wasn't at your house on February 3rd. He was at Abbott Northwestern Hospital, recovering from surgery. The investigation took another 3 months. Sandra subpoenaed Richard's hospital records, which confirmed he was admitted on January 29th and not discharged until February 12th. She interviewed his nurses and doctors, all of whom confirmed he was heavily medicated and frequently unconscious during the first week of February. She also tracked down the 2 witnesses whose signatures appeared on the transfer deed. One was Patricia's husband, Donald. The other was a man named Frank Mercer, who turned out to be Patricia's financial advisor. When Sandra confronted Linda Kowalski with this evidence, the notary broke down and admitted the truth. Patricia had called her and asked her to notarize a document. She said her brother was too ill to travel but wanted to transfer his property to her before he died. Linda never actually saw Richard sign anything. Patricia presented her with a document that already had a signature on it and asked her to notarize it. "It's called notary fraud," Sandra explained. "It's a felony in Minnesota." "But the signature?" I said. "It looks like Richard's handwriting." Sandra had hired a forensic handwriting expert who examined the transfer deed alongside dozens of samples of Richard's genuine signature. The expert's conclusion was damning. The signature on the transfer deed was traced. Someone had placed a genuine signature underneath and traced over it. The expert found telltale signs of hesitation marks and unnatural pen pressure that indicated the signer was copying rather than signing naturally. Armed with this evidence, Sandra filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia for fraud, forgery, and undue influence. We also reported the matter to the county attorney's office, which opened a criminal investigation. Patricia hired expensive lawyers. She claimed the signature was genuine, that Richard had asked her to arrange the notarization, that he had changed his mind about leaving me the lakehouse because he wanted the property to remain in his blood family. She portrayed me as a gold digger who had manipulated her sick brother. The case dragged on for over a year. There were depositions and hearings and motions and counter-motions. Patricia's lawyers tried everything to get the case dismissed. They argued that I had no standing to challenge the transfer because I wasn't a blood relative. They argued that the handwriting evidence was inconclusive. They argued that Richard had the right to change his mind about his property. Through it all, I held on to one hope. I knew there had to be something more. Richard was a meticulous man. He kept records of everything. Somewhere, somehow, he must have left behind proof of his true intentions. I was right. In the fall of 2012, I was cleaning out Richard's home office. I had put off this task for months because it was too painful, but the trial was approaching, and Sandra wanted me to search for any documents that might be relevant. I spent 3 days going through file cabinets and desk drawers. I found tax returns and bank statements and old letters from his parents. I found photographs from our wedding and ticket stubs from concerts we had attended. I found the playbill from our town, the show where we first met, pressed between the pages of a poetry anthology. On the 3rd day, I found a locked fireproof box at the back of his closet. I had seen this box before but never thought to open it. I assumed it contained important documents that Gerald already had copies of. It took me an hour to find the key, which was hidden in a false bottom of Richard's sock drawer. When I opened the box, I found his birth certificate, our marriage license, the deed to our Minneapolis house, and an envelope addressed to me in Richard's handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and something has gone wrong. I know my sister. I've known her my whole life. She was never satisfied with what she had. She always wanted more. When we were children, she stole my toys and blamed the dog. When we were teenagers, she forged my signature on a check from our parents' account. When we were adults, she manipulated our father into changing his will 6 times. I have never told you these things because I was ashamed. Patricia is my sister, and I loved her despite her flaws. I believed that blood was thicker than water, and I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. But I'm not naive. I know that when I die, Patricia will try to take the lakehouse. She has always wanted it. She has always resented that our parents left it to me. She told me once, when she thought I was asleep, that she would make sure she got what was rightfully hers. That's why I'm writing this letter and placing it somewhere she'll never find it. That's why I made sure to sign my will in front of witnesses and have it notarized by 3 different people on the same day. That's why I told Gerald to keep copies of everything in his office and in a safety deposit box that Patricia doesn't know exists. Eleanor, you are the love of my life. You gave up everything to take care of me. You held me when I was afraid. You stayed by my side when a lesser woman would have walked away. The lakehouse is yours. I promised you that, and I never break my promises. If Patricia has found some way to steal it from you, fight her. Don't give up. The truth is on your side, and so am I. I've also made a video recording that Gerald has in his possession. I made it on December 15th, 2010, when I was still lucid enough to speak clearly. In that video, I state my wishes unambiguously. The lakehouse goes to you, not Patricia, not anyone else. You. I love you forever. Richard. I sat on the floor of his closet and cried. I cried for the husband I had lost. I cried for the betrayal I had suffered. I cried because even in death, Richard was still protecting me. I called Sandra immediately. She contacted Gerald, who confirmed that he did have a video in his safety deposit box. He had forgotten about it in the chaos of Richard's death and the subsequent legal battles. When we watched the recording together, I saw my husband sitting in his hospital bed, pale and thin but clear-eyed. "My name is Richard Allen Henderson," he said in the video. "I am of sound mind, and I am making this recording to state my final wishes. I want my wife, Eleanor Marie Henderson, to inherit our family lake house on Lake Vermilion. I have already signed a will to this effect. I am making this video as additional proof because I do not trust my sister Patricia to respect my wishes." The video was dated and time-stamped. It was witnessed by Gerald Hoffman and 2 nurses from the oncology ward. When Sandra presented this evidence to Patricia's lawyers, the case collapsed almost immediately. The video was irrefutable. Combined with the hospital records proving Richard couldn't have signed the transfer deed, the forensic evidence showing the signature was forged, and the notary's confession that she never actually witnessed Richard sign anything, Patricia had no defense. The civil trial lasted only 4 days. The jury found in my favor and awarded me full ownership of the lake house, plus $350,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal fees. But that wasn't the end of it. The county attorney had been building a criminal case against Patricia. She was charged with forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. Her husband Donald and the notary Linda Kowalski were charged as co-conspirators. The financial advisor, Frank Mercer, cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Patricia's criminal trial took place in the spring of 2013. I testified for 2 days. I told the jury about my marriage to Richard, about the years I spent caring for him, about the moment Patricia announced she was selling the lake house at his funeral reception. I read Richard's letter aloud in court. I watched the jury members' faces as they heard my dead husband's words. Patricia took the stand in her own defense. She claimed she had only been trying to protect the family legacy. She claimed Richard had verbally told her he wanted her to have the lake house. She claimed the documents were legitimate and that I was a liar. No one believed her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Patricia guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison for forgery and fraud. Donald received 2 years for his role in the conspiracy. Linda Kowalski, who had cooperated fully with prosecutors, received probation. I was in the courtroom when Patricia was led away in handcuffs. She looked at me as she passed, and for a moment I thought I saw something like regret in her eyes. But then her expression hardened, and she looked away. I never saw her again. I kept the lake house. I still live here now, 12 years later. I never sold a single acre. I never demolished the guest cottage or the boathouse. I maintained it all myself, just as I always had, because this place is not just a piece of property. It's my husband's legacy. It's our life together. It's the dock where he proposed to me and the bedroom where he took his last breath. Some people have asked me if I feel guilty about what happened to Patricia. After all, she was Richard's sister. She spent years in prison. Her marriage ended. Her children barely speak to her. I don't feel guilty. I feel sad. Sad that greed destroyed our family. Sad that Patricia threw away 30 years of sisterhood for money she didn't need and a house she never truly loved. Sad that Richard's final months were overshadowed by his sister's schemes. But I don't feel guilty because I didn't do anything wrong. I honored my husband's wishes. I fought for what was rightfully mine. I refused to let Patricia's lies become the truth. Richard once told me that the measure of a person isn't how they act when things are easy. It's how they act when things are hard. When everything in my life fell apart, when the woman I thought was my family tried to steal everything from me, I could have given up. I could have walked away. I could have decided that a house wasn't worth the fight. But I didn't. I stood my ground. I found the truth. And in the end, justice prevailed. Every evening, when the sun sets over Lake Vermilion and paints the water in shades of gold and amber, I walk down to the dock where Richard proposed to me. I sit in the old wooden chair that his grandfather built, and I watch the light fade, and I talk to my husband. I kept our home, I tell him, just like I promised. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the water is still, I swear I can hear him answer, "I know you did, Eleanor. I always knew you would." If you're watching this video, maybe you're going through something similar. Maybe someone in your family has betrayed your trust. Maybe you're fighting for something that was promised to you. Maybe you're wondering if it's worth the pain. Let me tell you something. It's worth it. The truth is always worth fighting for. And no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it gets, justice has a way of finding its way to the surface. Don't give up. Don't let the liars win. And remember that the people who truly love you will find a way to protect you, even from beyond the grave. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in some way, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.